All right. Hi, folks. Everybody holding up okay in the heat? I hear this is a very big deal here. Where I'm from, it's pretty normal. So I'm trying to be both respectful. Um, um, okay. So I'd like you to take a moment to imagine that your company's board discovers a hidden vulnerability. So this is putting you into a thought experiment of being in a management position at a company that impacts and depends on nature, and they realize that a massive portion of their long-term value depends on systems that they haven't fully mapped, on risks they haven't accurately priced, and on critical infrastructure that, if broken, you can't simply replace. These systems determine whether the water you need to operate is available. They dictate whether your physical assets can withstand shocks, and they determine whether your supply chains can keep moving. If this came to the board of directors of your company, they would see it for what it is: a critical material risk to business resilience. That is precisely how companies need to start understanding nature, not as a standalone sustainability topic, but as a central business issue tied to sourcing, operations, supply chains, and resilience. As climate impacts intensify, and this week's extreme heat is a very timely reminder, the fundamental health of natural systems matter more than ever to business continuity and long-term performance. And the risk isn't abstract. It's already showing up in sourcing disruptions, commodity price volatility, severe water stress in manufacturing hubs, and the degradation of the ecosystems that companies depend on. We've spent the last decade building real momentum around climate action, but we're learning a hard truth. You can't solve for climate change without solving for the health of nature and the ecosystems upon which we depend. And the next phase of corporate climate leadership must integrate both. With climate, we learned that ambition is not enough. Companies need measurable, time-bound, and science-based ways to act. Today, I want to talk about why that exact same shift must now happen for nature and how we actually do it. So, what's the problem? There's what I would call the complexity trap. One of the biggest barriers to corporate action on nature is not a lack of awareness or concern. If I speak to any CEO or chief sustainability officer, they'll tell me that they know and they care. But the barrier is a lack of clarity. Nature is infinitely more complex to measure than carbon. A ton of CO2 emitted in London has the same global impact as a ton of CO2 emitted in Jakarta. And greenhouse gas emissions are highly standardizable. Nature, as many of you already know, doesn't work like that. There isn't a single metric, and impacts are location specific. As an example, a gallon of water saved in a drought-stricken basin where I live in California is fundamentally different from a gallon saved in a rainy valley in Scotland. Add to that the fact that value chains are sprawling, data is imperfect, traceability is challenging, and the regulatory standards are still evolving and are fragmented across jurisdictions. Because of this, companies fall into what I call the complexity trap. Many companies that I've been speaking to here at London Climate Week, and you may be in this room, are already taking action. You may have water stewardship programs, biodiversity initiatives. You might fund regenerative agriculture pilots and enforce supplier certifications. These are essential foundations. But without a unifying science-based structure, we face a critical question. Are companies doing the right things in the right places at the scale that nature actually requires? I'll keep away from the pocket mic over here. Sorry for the feedback. It's still happening. Is it annoying? It's fine. Okay. It's worse for me. All right. Yay. um, so that's the question. Are companies doing the right things in the right places at the scale that nature actually requires? When complexity overwhelms us, it leads to a scattershot approach. We launch isolated initiatives. And the real danger is that we mistake scattered activity for credible progress. And we confuse motion with momentum. Business needs a way to move faster without oversimplifying the very real ecological challenges we face. So, how do we cut through complexity? We turn to the same mechanism that mobilized action on climate science-based targets. You heard from David Kennedy earlier yesterday, the CEO of Science Based Targets Initiative, about the latest on climate science-based targets. At SBTN, we build on SBTI's precedent and expand coverage to nature broadly. Together, science-based targets for climate with SBTI and with nature with SBTN are the most credible path toward action on climate and nature globally. Science-based targets for nature are designed specifically to pull companies out of the complexity trap, to move from complexity to clear priorities. They help answer 4 questions that matter most up here on the screen. First is, what's material? Said in another way, where are we actually causing the most impact? Second, where should action come first? And that is essentially which ecosystems are closest to tipping points. Question 3, how much action is needed? In other words, what's our fair share of the issue and solutions? And lastly, what is a credible basis for claims? And this is about how do we demonstrate that we are not greenwashing. Underpinning all 4 of these questions is what we call the action or mitigation hierarchy. And that is a scientifically agreed upon framework for the hierarchy of action needed to take, starting with avoiding, for instance, avoiding conversion of natural ecosystems, then moving on to reducing impacts where negative impacts are unavoidable, then moving on to restoration and regeneration to make up for those negative impacts, and lastly, transformation, about transforming business models and systems. And that action hierarchy underpins all the guidance we have for companies on how to take credible action. And we do that with a structured, data-led pathway. It allows a company to bring disparate efforts together and align them into clear priorities that respect actual ecological limits. This matters because nature is not an abstract spreadsheet exercise. It's hyper-local. It's connected to specific river basins, landscapes, farms deep within the corporate value chain. We provide an approach that reflects that ground level reality while giving the C-suite a practical, unified dashboard to track resilience. So let me move to some examples in the real world. Unfortunately, by virtue of communication sensitivity these days, they have to be anonymized examples rather than attributed. But are useful nonetheless. So first, we have a global food and beverage company that used Science-Based Targets Network's guidance to make nature decision useful. At this company, nature was already on the agenda, but the company needed a way to move from broad concern to focused business action. We gave the teams common language and a structured way to identify which regions, supply chain stages, and raw material risks mattered most. It helped to bring procurement, finance, operations, senior leaders, and investors into the same conversation and made supplier data requests easier to justify because they were grounded in a recognized science-based approach. In a nutshell, the company told us that they gained a common language to inform decisions across finance, procurement, and operations. In a second example, there's a European dairy company that used SBTN to turn complexity into confidence around their direction of travel. With a large value chain, this company's challenge was not whether nature mattered. It was where to focus and how to act locally, and how to know whether the direction was robust. SBTN helped validate the company's priorities, reduce the risk of focusing in the wrong areas, and support CSRD-related work on biodiversity-sensitive areas and double materiality. It gave the company a clearer basis for engaging farmers, customers, partners, and policymakers around a shared science-based direction. The company learned how to focus supply chain engagement efforts where they matter most. These companies aren't just doing their part to protect nature, they're building better, smarter, more resilient businesses. And we're looking to get the word out because it's early stages of adoption, and we need to have more companies leading by example. So I imagine that some of you are thinking, this sounds great, but our data isn't ready, or we don't have full visibility down multiple tiers of our supply chain, or maybe you're not at a company and you have a different role in the system. And here, the most important thing I will say today is that you oftentimes hear the oft overused phrase, don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. A twist on that is perfect is the enemy of the planet. And we don't need perfect conditions to begin. What we need is credible starting point, a science-based way to prioritize, and a commitment to improve data and traceability over time. And we have that today. So my ask is simple, and that's to start where action is credible. We have the means now for companies to validate their progress where they want to make claims, and to be able to build over time to more comprehensive action step by step. And I'm pragmatic. I come from the business sector, and I'm in this because I believe in doing my part to help transition our economy toward how we will all thrive in the long run. And I understand the reality of the challenges of how much this is to bite off. And that's why we've developed accelerated pathways. And they're designed specifically to help companies begin with a focused, credible area to start progressing now, while building capacity for fuller action later. So accelerated pathways enable a company to focus efforts, be it by business unit, for instance, starting with one product line or one geographic area, or by environmental realm, like fresh water, land, or ocean, starting with one, if that's where it's most, where your company is most ready and it's material, and or segment of the value chain, for instance, starting with direct operations if upstream remains a challenge. So those are the ways in which we're enabling companies to get to credible action sooner, to focus where nature needs it most, and to prove what's possible and then scale from there. So this brings me to my closing observations here. From my vantage point, I was just sitting with the World Economic Forum's Global Futures Council this morning on climate and nature governance, and we're talking about what's coming down the pike in 3 to 5 years. And I said, business models that solve for equity, net zero, nature positive. That's the opportunity of our time. And anything that's just about compliance and risk reduction is missing that massive strategic opportunity. And so, over the next decade, the companies that will succeed are the ones that lead the next phase of climate and nature action, not the ones waiting on the sidelines for perfect data or for perfect regulation or so on. They're the ones stepping up for nature. They're using the best available science to make better decisions today and committing to improve. Because the businesses that will thrive in this future are the ones who act on the opportunity to solve these real-world problems, beginning with the health of the systems we all depend on. They see the opportunity for value creation, for business resilience, by doing their part for a nature-positive future. Tomorrow, we will announce the latest cohort of companies stepping up for nature, with more than 40 companies publicly signaling their next step towards science-based targets for nature. This is really important as a signal in this unique moment of time. And the invitation is open to join them because nature is the ultimate infrastructure of business, and it's time we start treating it that way. Thank you.